Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. We're on the road again in Oklahoma, and today we are visiting a very special place. Now, I attempted to come here once before, but it was so windy I could not even get out of the van because the doors would blow right back onto me. But finally we are here. We are at the Washita National Battlefield and also the Black Kettle National Grasslands. I'm really excited because I've been told that this place is awesome and definitely one that I need to check out, so here we go. Okay guys, we're about to move inside of the museum portion, and then there's an outdoor section as well. Now, I was told that we start around here and it kind of works in a big circle. So we're gonna go through that, and then we might be stopping off downstairs to pick up something kind of special that I want to share with you in a minute. But let's go see what they have here at the battlefield. I'm really excited because this is not like some of the other battlefields we've been to. It's a little bit different, so very interested in sharing this with you. Now, as soon as we walk in, this museum instantly starts to work with some of the other Oklahoma museums that we have gone to. You can see in this display right here, as we kind of look down at the different elements, it shares with us the impact of the relocation. And as we walk through, it's going to talk a little bit more about that for the Native Americans that were relocated off of their land and what happened as a result of that. So this is the expansion of the Great Plains area, as you can see right here. And as we continue going, beautiful exhibits, beautiful, wonderful exhibits. Starting off, the clash of the cultures. Right here, we have a little bit of information about the Indian Wars on the Southern Plains. And here you can see a depiction of some of those people. Now, something I really like about museums like this is they don't just give you the face value. You also can open up and find out a little bit more. So there's an entire exhibit right here where you can see a quote, and then whenever you open it up, again, it tells you a little bit more of the story. Now, as we've learned through some of the other stops as well as this one, before reservations, Indians were a lot of times more nomadic. The Native American people called the land their home, but used it as they kind of moved along. And so the thought of them having to settle down in one place was a foreign thing. However, whenever the land rush happened, they were moving them into these tiny little spaces, which limited a lot of their ability to do their typical activities. And this is what that might have looked like. Do you see all of the swooshes inward? All of these were different Native American groups that were pulled into tiny spaces right here in Oklahoma. Right here. See this? So people came from all over the country to settle in this one tiny little area. Now, another thing that we notice is that some of these tribes may or may not have gotten along with one another. And now they were forced to live together under basically a tiny little amount of space. So in addition to the settlers that were coming in, this also caused conflict within the tribes. And there was a lot of things going on for those people to have to deal with at that time. But that's just the beginning of the story. Here we learn a little bit more about the treaties and how that they were built for the people who were settling, not so much for the Native Americans, and why that didn't work out. And then if we go into here, we can find out a little bit more about those treaties. There's the Fort Laramie Treaty, and it shows you the lands that would have been affiliated with this, and then what they would have entailed. It says here $50,000 in supplies and provisions annually for the next 50 years. But later on, they changed it to only 10 years Wow. And here is another, and this is what it would have originally looked like. This is very neat to be able to see the original documents, kind of how they were laid out. But then again, it tells you a little bit more about this. February 18th, 1861, Black Kettle, White Antelope, Little Raven, and other chiefs signed the Fort Wise Treaty. This one surrendered almost all of the lands of the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. Now, of course, there are a few others that you will definitely want to check out if you visit the museum, and they're all located right here. These paint the picture of what led up to the events that happened at this very site. So I definitely encourage you to pause and check that out for a little quick background reading. And as you can see here, in the background, these are all of the tribes' names this affected. So many tribes. Now, in the 1860s, it went on that there were a lot of misinterpretations of what had happened just over here. And soon there was a breakdown in the chain of command. People didn't know exactly what to do, and there was a lot of bickering amongst the government as to how to proceed. This led to the implementation of several different policies and ultimately a complete breakdown of communication between the Native Americans and the military that were supposed to be enforcing these things. And so it became a really big mess. And at this particular time, it was not pretty. You didn't have a cell phone you could call somebody up and iron out the details. People would be coming in and going back and forth between these meetings, and there were a lot of ears in between to lose the information, kind of like an old game of telephone. Do you hear it? As you walk into this room, you hear the stories of the actual people, and this room lights up. Now, as tensions continued to grow, the military lashed out against the Cheyenne, and they actually decided that they would strike them in the time that they were the most vulnerable, which was the winter time. It was during this time that supplies were more limited, people were more weak from having to go through the elements just to get back and forth to these places, and that their overall ability to attack and retaliate were much more limited in comparison to the soldiers, which had more resources. It was here that the siege began. And as you can see in this room, this is a depiction of what that would have looked like. In the back, notice there are soldiers coming through the village. The villagers are trying to scavenge for anything that they can to protect themselves. The men are hiding their children. The women are running. They're trying to use any kind of tools that they have just to protect their village. And in the meantime, as you'll see, these guys over here have stronger firepower. And they're basically on their way to ravage this village. Along this bank, we find some of the people who would have been in this conflict. Some of them are from the cavalry, others are some of the Native Americans. And in the midst, this, which describes the attack at dawn on November 27th, 1868, by Lieutenant Colonel George A. Custer. Now in this attack, keep in mind, they did not just target the men. It was all just because they wanted them to move and get off the land and do what they wanted them to do. They came in and they slayed people. This happened all too many times as we look through our history, and I think that that's why I continue to come back to these sites, because I learn a little bit more each time. And it's just really sad, guys. So this is definitely a place that if you're interested in finding out a little bit more, you should visit, because they have a great reference for many of the elements that happened along the way. Like this, a quote from Magpie of the Cheyenne. From the top of a high ridge, after escaping from the village, I watched the battle, and I saw soldiers burn down the village and slaughter all the ponies. This made the Indians very angry. and they would have attacked the soldiers had they not been afraid that such an attack would bring death to the women and children of the soldiers they had captured. Or this, by moving behind, also of the Cheyenne. Many Indians were killed during the fight. The air was full of smoke from gunfire, and it was almost impossible to flee because the bullets were flying everywhere. However, somehow, we ran and kept running to find a hiding place. As we ran, we could see the red fire of the shots. There was red grass along the path, and although the ponies had eaten some of it, it was still high enough for us to hide in it. Or this, Lone Wolf's wife. We ran out of our teepees and tried to run out through the narrow entrance. We saw white men in front of us monitoring to us to go back. Then the battle began. I don't know which side began shooting first. I fell on my face in the snow and could hear nothing but guns. At last, the shooting stopped, and the next thing I knew, a soldier punched me with his gun and motioned for me to get up. There were several other women lying close to me. Men, women, and children lay dead everywhere. I saw many of the warriors lying dead with their guns in their hands. Now, after seeing those quotes and hearing the story above and seeing the painting, it's really hard to not understand a little bit better just how bad some of these events actually were. And there's a little bit more here that I'm going to show you just kind of as I walk through so that you can kind of see what else is available for you to learn a little bit more. Okay guys, so as you can see, lots of things for you to look at whenever you go in and browse, but we're not finished yet. We still have our outdoor space, a little bit more of the story, and then also we're going to stop off at the Grassland office because we're getting our park pass. We just got our park pass. We just got our park pass. We just got our park pass because we're gonna go on an adventure, guys. But before we do, we have a walking loop around the visitor center that we are going to tackle. Now this walk can actually be found right here outside of the visitor center, and then after we finish this, we're going to drive this short distance over to this area, which is the actual battlefield historic site. And this is where you would have found Black Kettle's camp. Now again, Black Kettle's camp was the one that we learned about, that the soldiers came in during those winter months and absolutely decimated and destroyed, also taking a lot of people hostage. I did learn at the very end of the museum that some of those hostages were returned to their families later on, but still, can you imagine being scooped up away from your family and held against your will? That is not okay. Now, as we walk down this path right here, we actually are going to have a few more signs to stop at and learn a little bit more. If for some reason you do come after the visitor center has closed for the day, you can still have access to this particular area and then also the battlefield area. They are open, so keep that in mind. Okay, we are starting off on the Dustin Fire Trail right here, and this is going to tell us a little bit more about this area through these little dots. We're starting off at the visitor center, and as we go around, we'll learn about all of these different things. Now this is not a very long trail. In fact, it's only 0.4 miles. They do recommend about 45 minutes of time. It is a hard surface, and as you can see, this is handicap accessible. And I love that. I think that all trails should be accessible whenever they're right next to a visitor center. Now, a couple things to note. It's kind of warm out here today, so it might not take us 45 minutes. It's not one of those days that you spend outside in a black shirt for a long time. Just saying. Also, we're going to keep our eyes open for snakes, because even though there are no signs posted here, I know this area of Oklahoma pretty well, and well, reference the Boiling Springs video. According to this, it was a misty morning, April 19th, 1892, and 25,000 settlers gathered to find a homestead during the land run. Now, that also meant that all of these areas had already been divided up. And as you can see here, there are many different iterations of this. So what started out at first in 1850 transitioned into Oklahoma in 1907. Now this is why even to this day you will go in and out of various tribal lands throughout the state of Oklahoma. Now if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about how the land run worked, make sure you check out my territorial museum video, because it goes into a lot more detail as to what it took to have an actual homestead and to participate in the land run, and also what the result was for the Native Americans in conjunction to a little bit more than that map. Speaking of homesteading, after the land rush, people had to find a way to make inhospitable land work for them. And this family right here can be seen living in what was considered to be like a dugout structure. Now, this was their house, and it was located inside of a little hill. And they would do this, for one, because they didn't need a lot of materials, but also so that they could have some protection from the harsh elements of Oklahoma. And this is how a lot of families started out on their little plot of land. Now, I've said it once, and I'll probably say it 100 more times when we go to these kind of sites. It was hard back then, guys, super hard. It was not an easy go to the convenience store, get what you want, come home, kick your feet up and watch some TV kind of lifestyle. No, everything that they had, everything that they did, everything that they ate, they had to figure it out by hand most of the time. And so coming to the land with all this promise wasn't just the end all be all. Then they had to figure out what to do with it, how to make it work. It was a lot. Look guys, I see our next one and it looks like it's a windmill. Why yes, it is a windmill. And windmills were so important because they actually pumped the water for use to the individual farm or household. And as you can see today, with that windmill going full blast right now, that would have been perfect conditions for pumping. This is a very windy section of Oklahoma, so windmills here would have produced a lot more than the areas maybe to the east where the wind wasn't sweeping down the plain quite as much. I mean, have you ever wondered why they say Oklahoma, where the wind goes sweeping down the plains? Yeah, that's why, right there. Yeah. Of course, the fancy windmill we see right now is a little bit different than maybe what would have been at a typical household, which would have been right here. Now, something else that we could also note is that little critters were actually attracted to the areas that had watering holes or water storage. And those might have included box turtles, northern bobwhites, or kangaroo rats. These things actually help to produce more plants that these little critters would eat. So it would be an asset to them to be close by. Now, for some reason today, ants are attracted. Lots and lots of ants. So on we go, because the ants were trying to follow me up my shoes and go on this hike with us, and we're not having that. At our next stop, we find the Prairie Providers, and it talks about how for centuries Native people have thrived in the southern plains because the prairie plants offered them everything that they needed. Now, whenever I visited Arkansas's Blue Spring, I learned a little bit more about how they would cultivate different kinds of plants for different things. Everything from medicines to foods, and pretty much everything in between. And it was really cool to have learned that, because now I can come to a place like this and see the intentional planting of certain items, and it kind of makes more sense as to why that would be there. Like, look at this, the prickly pear. Most of us see a prickly pear and we think, oh no, stay away, that could hurt me. But these actually were able to be used to eat. And it wasn't just like jams and jellies like we see now. They were actually eaten for stews, or they were dried. And then when we go down to the cone flour, these were actually used to help with toothaches, coughs, colds, sore throats, and snake bites. So see, absolutely fascinating stuff. And speaking of snake bites, still looking, still looking. Now as we're walking along, it has a nice wide path, but then there's all this brush. And the reason why they keep this brush is because this is actually still a natural habitat for all sorts of kinds of critters, including this guy right here. We found a bunny. But something else kind of fascinating that I just learned is that Indian grass is actually the state grass of Oklahoma, and it can span up to like 7 feet tall. That is crazy, and I didn't ever know that, so cool fact. Now this sign is actually quite interesting. This is about fire on the prairie. Now, as you can imagine, with all of this brush, this could go very badly should fire touch it. It would be up like that. Now we've learned at other national parks that fire is part of the natural cycle of life, and it's very important for new growth, but it also poses a lot of different things that can be negative, such as it kills off wildlife or it makes them have to move to other areas. So it's important to have a good balance, and I think what they're doing here by demonstrating this is absolutely awesome. Now we talked about how hard it was, so hard, but in addition to the natural challenges of setting up and establishing, there were also things like the fire, and then also drought. Drought struck this area hard in the 1930s, and as a result of that, many people had to move away because they simply couldn't make it work anymore. Like, they abandoned their lands because it was literally dust. Some of the pictures that are shown here, you can see this is them actually trying to make it work despite all of the challenges. It shows here that the Prairie and Osage Orange fence row testify to the fight to save the land. 200 miles of tree rows were planted as windbreaks to stop things like this from happening. Do you see how the wind is just sweeping across and the dust is blowing in and it's destroying everything in its path? This right here is what it would have literally looked like for people to have packed up everything that they had and to have gone elsewhere in hopes of finding some kind of opportunity. Now, a great illustration of this is to watch The Grapes of Wrath, and I definitely encourage you to do so because it definitely gives you a visual of what it would have been like to have been in this area at that time. Like I said, super hot out there, but we did make it in under 45 minutes, like I said we would, because it is way too hot to be out there for an extended amount of time while wearing black today. Yes, it is. Now, with that being said, I definitely recommend the little trail because it was awesome. It does tell a very different story than what you see on the inside. You're seeing more so what happens when people were coming here during the land run, and then how they would have had to settle the land, the challenges that that might have created for them, and even some of the steps that are being taken today in this current area. Inside, you see more of the Native American story, and so it's important that we see both of those to kind of know how they fit together in the bigger picture, because we like to learn on the channel, and that's what we do. But now that we've learned, we are cooling off, and I can tell you a little bit more about the park pass. I pick one of these up literally every year because it's a great deal and it allows you to see all of the national parks for one price. Now, typically if you go to a site like this, there's no charge to go through the museum, and that's really cool. However, that is not the case with a lot of the parks. A lot of the parks do charge a hefty entrance fee, and I've seen some that are like 35 bucks, so that adds up real quick. But for a one-time fee of $80, you can go see literally every single one of them within a calendar year that you want to, and it saves so much money. Now, I did pick this up so we can talk about the different kinds of passes and also what they are used for, in addition to how you can pick one up. Now, here we go. the annual pass, the volunteer pass, the senior pass annual, the senior pass lifetime, and the access pass. Each one of these has a different price point, a different qualification point, and if you're a person who's just a regular everyday person like me, we qualify for the annual pass, which is a one-time fee of $80 once per year. Now, if you're like me, I like to have mine just when I'm ready for it. So I just go ahead and pop into an office and say, hey, I need to pick up a pass. They're $80. They charge my card. We're good to go. And that's it. But if you do want to plan in advance of your journeys, you can also pop onto the website and order them, but then you're at the mercy of however long it takes for them to ship it to you. And I don't know how long that is, so just kind of be aware that you're not going to have it like the next day. So keep that in mind too. Now this is my favorite part. All these little logos right here, these are all covered by the park pass in some capacity. So if you go to visit one of these sites and there is a regular entrance fee, your pass will apply to almost all of them. Now typically this isn't something I have to worry about too much because I normally travel by myself, but my annual pass will actually admit me plus 3 additional people. So if I decide I want to travel with my friends and we're all in the same vehicle, it will pay for all of us. Now something else I noticed whenever I was visiting Zion a couple years ago, I had my annual pass and I was actually taking the trolley to the main gate, and I was with Anika and her sister. All I had to do was show the pass. Anika, her sister, and myself all covered, even not in our vehicle. Now last but not least, I wanted to tell you about some of the additional features that this little park pass right here can get you. It's pretty cool because although I like to camp on a lot of free lands like the public sites and things like that, there are some campgrounds out there that I really like that are like the Corps of Engineers sites or the water management sites. And some of those have a small fee that you have to pay to go along with them. However, in recent years, I have noticed a lot of those particular sites are starting to give a small discount if you're displaying your pass. So also something that you might think about. Now, each site will vary and you definitely need to look at the kiosk whenever you come into camp, but yeah. Park pass, we got our park pass. Now let's go finish up this adventure. Just a short distance from the visitor center, we have arrived at the battlefield area. And again, this is a 315-acre space with a trail that actually runs down through it. Now, I have seen some signs saying there are prayer flags placed kind of along the way, and that we should honor and respect those who have placed them by not filming those areas. So I don't want to go down that area and disrupt that space because it is still considered by the natives to be a sacred place. So instead, we're going to look at what's available at the trailhead itself and tell you a little bit more about the story according to this stone. Now, if you were unable to go to the visitor center, this does have a description of the events that took place on that day. This was called the Battle of the Washita, and as you can see, Black Kettle and Custer are both represented on this sign. Black Kettle was actually considered to be a peace leader, and he was a major part in the Southern Cheyenne. A lot of people looked up to him, and he sought out military assurance that they would not be attacked here. However, again, if you watch the beginning of the video, you know that communication broke down many, many times, and this was never assured to him. And as a result, things started to unfold. That reassurance would never come, however, and it was said because some of the people who were camping within the Black Kettle camp had potentially had something to do with a raid in Kansas, that Custer instead leaned his full weight into this very space with that surprise attack. And as a result, many perished or were taken. Now again, I think it's important for us to come to sites like this because we learn a lot about what has happened in the past so that we can get the full picture, and then from that picture we can make choices which make for better tomorrows. The things that have happened in places like this are harrowing, to say the least, but they're things that actually happened, and seeing that and hearing the full story really shows you what man can be capable of. And I think that's why I like to come to places like this. I learn so much, and then I can see how I personally can make an impact by being kind and by changing things and doing stuff like that. And maybe that's not what you want to hear by coming to places like this, but that's what I take away. And I think we each take away something a little bit different, and that's what's important. As you can see here, the Washita battlefield was actually designated as a registered National Historic Landmark in 1965. Just beyond the camera, you see the trailhead Washita, and down that trail you can find Black Kettle's camp. But here, under this pavilion, you can actually find a map of the positioning of the troops as they swept in. And as you'll notice, right here, this is where the Cheyenne actually were sitting. There's the creek. Elliott's men were killed here. This is where Elliott's command was held. This is some of the mountains that we see in front of us, just through there. You have Thompson's command. And then this is where Custer waited. He waited just beyond this ridge, which, if you follow this ridge up, is right up here. Now, if you are coming out to the Washita Battlefield National Historic Site, you can pick up a map either in the Visitor Center or right over here by the pavilion. I definitely encourage you to do so because the map has much more than just little points of interest. It also tells a little bit more of the story. They also have a water fill station out here, so definitely get a little bit of water before you hit the trail. And remember, they just ask that you don't take pictures of the prayer flags because this is still considered sacred ground. So, with that being said, I think we're about to get back into Dimples, hit the road, and go off to our next adventure. I hope you have enjoyed coming with me today. I know I certainly enjoyed coming out here with you guys. And so, until next time, bye!